kind of sad. Tanev was he's not a world beater or anything, but he's kind of a guy that I thought would be a good fit. You never know. But on to other things, I guess, man. He gone.
If you're Craig Conroy, the GM of the Calgary Flames, you are looking for the best deal possible. I don't care if it's Edmonton. I don't care if it's Toronto and the previous GM. I just would like to think GMs are not that petty.
But also with Conroy, like you're always measured against your predecessor and who came before you, rather. And if you do a big deal with him and it doesn't end up going bad, there's just going to be this whole layer of he was better than you. And
the Leafs acquiring Ilya Lyubushkin, 75% retained. I think that's the big kicker in this entire trade. So Anaheim gets a third, and they retain 50% of the contract. And the Carolina Hurricanes, I talk about the third-party broker. I think it's going to be a theme of this year's trade deadline. Happened already with New Jersey the other day in the Tanev deal. They retain 25%. Nick Alberga and Jay Roseau. Ilya Lyubushkin is coming back to the Toronto Maple Leafs. What's going on, Rosie? I think it's shrewd business by Brad Treliving. Add some depth in the back end.
It really seems like it. I mean, yeah, we wanted Tanev, and we didn't get him. We weren't giving up our first rounder for him. Therefore, you're not going to get him. So you move on. And I really think that this, like the pieces that we're talking about that we need, like we talk about all the time, it may not be a big swinging guy that comes in. Sometimes that disrupts a locker room, and the small pieces, sometimes the intangibles make the big difference.
Played with Ilya Lyubushkin, so you know what this guy's all about, right?
Yeah, I love it. I was with him in Arizona for a while there. Great guy, great Russian. I don't know for those who don't know what that means, but sometimes Russians can be on their own page and they can be hard to buy in. But this guy is a North American player, a good guy, a family man, just wears it on his sleeve. And trust me, it's not always glitz and glamour with Bush, but he's a guy that you want come playoff time.
There isn't a player out there, at least that we know, is on the trade market that I would even contemplate trading Easton Cowan
but
for.
You already have 150 goals in 3 of your you already have a top line of forwards for the next 5, 6, 7 years, right? So you think about that, right?
The only way I'd consider it if they got a Saros. Yeah. Like UC Saros is a bona fide stud number one netminder. I don't care what people say. I don't care what they say about Joseph Wall. If you can get your hands on a guy like that, then Easton Cowan's a guy I would think about. I just don't think it makes any sense right now. If you don't want to trade your first round pick, you're going to trade Easton Cowan. Like, I just don't see a name out there that makes sense where it's like, wow, we got to trade this guy right now. Because if we grab this guy, we're winning the Stanley Cup. I don't have that feel. We just talked to Frank Seravalli. There's a reason there hasn't been a trade consummated of significance in the last 25 days. GMs know there's nobody fucking out there to be traded. Aside from Adam Henrique, who we love on this show.
In terms of how this looks for the Maple Leafs moving forward, I think there's a lot of things in flux. I think there's a bunch of different holes to fill. I think there's a general manager in Brad Treliving that's motivated to fill them, but he's also dealing at the deadline basically with one hand tied behind his back in terms of the available assets to move to fill all those holes at once. Do you try a scattershot approach and try and dink and dunk and try and do them one at a time? Is it a bigger package if you're trading that first round pick? I tend to believe, and this is my own personal opinion, that if the Leafs end up trading that first round pick this time around, that the only way that they do that is if they're filling multiple holes at once.
Can you tell us about not just the play, but the character and attitude about, say, Matt Dumba, for example, who all of a sudden is looking like a potential fit that they might go after? You're obviously pretty familiar with him.
Yeah, Matt, and I've watched Matt a lot this year out in Arizona. He signed a 1-year sort of prove it deal. Matt had some injury issues, a couple seasons ago, and the offensive part of his game hasn't been there this year. He hasn't put up maybe the points or scored the goals that he has in the past. He's being used in a lot of matchup situations, PK. He's been very physically engaged, despite having a pretty tough injury a couple of years ago. He's throwing the weight around, and I think Matt has a lot to prove right now. And again, I don't know if he's quite where he was at prior to the injury, but in saying that, he's competed and he's played more and more minutes down here for Arizona, and I think he's played pretty well.
They're still in the market, and I think that just about anything is possible. It's all, cost prohibitive, of course. I think they'd like to add another defenseman, and not just because we all saw Mark Giordano go down in a dangerous play last night. You hope the best for the veteran defenseman. But I think that if there's an opportunity to add a depth guy then most definitely they'll do that. I don't want to close the book on the idea of adding a depth forward, though, either. You know, when you get to this point with the trade deadline looming, it's all about cost effectiveness. So if there's a player that maybe we haven't even speculated on that all of a sudden lands at your feet and you can make it work, not a defenseman, but a forward, well, you make it work. I mean, it's whatever is there that makes your team a little bit better.
That's the longest recorded point streak in London Knights franchise history. He's got 20 goals, 49 points over that 26-game stretch. Is he an untouchable ahead of the deadline for you?
Oh, yes, man.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. That's like big numbers, man. That's like I'm too good for this league numbers. You're talking about the London Knights. Do you know what their alumni history is? Do you know who's played on that? And you're doing things that none of them could ever do. And we're talking about like Stanley Cup champions, big time hardware winners in the NHL, potential Hall of Famers. Like the London Knights' history is rich as it gets. And
Joseph Woll recalled from the American Hockey League. Everything just coming up Maple Leafs right now. It's great to see, man.
Yeah, it is. It's a good time, man. What a roller coaster.
I think every team and every example of using a 3-goalie system hasn't looked particularly great, especially in Toronto where you're so cap strapped and you're going to have a goalie on your roster not to really play. I don't think it makes much sense. I just don't want them to big brain this whole operation, you know?
I don't think they will. I think Jones will hang out until we see how Woll goes. I don't think he'll get any game action. I think if Woolsey's looking solid and they're deciding who's playing every night between Sammy and Woll, and he looks like he is now presently set in concrete back in the lineup, like he's back, then I could see Jones going through waivers.
I would ease him in. I think the way Samsonov's playing right now, we talked about this last week. I think Thursday makes the most sense against Arizona. This is like the new heavyweight on the block. And I'm just fascinated to think, like, does Reeves think he has to go? Does he have to give this kid the fight? But I think if you're Rempe, it's easy to get that fight. Take one run at Matthews, take one run at somebody, and Reeves is going to go you probably. Odds of Reeves fighting versus the Rangers, what would you put them at, Rosie?
Yeah, I think it would be fairly high, man. I mean, he's buzzing. People are talking about him as being more effective in the lineup. I'm sure he'd like to reiterate that. And I mean, obviously, we're talking about Rempe over there, right? And that kid has been coming out like a buzzsaw. It seems like he is everywhere in the media world. Guys love his sound bites. They love his scraps. They love his size. They love his story. And he does not seem to be scared. He's going in there against some tough guys. His scrap against Delory was as throwback old school as it gets. My only caveat is he probably got knocked down a peg or so against Olivier there. Confidence probably took a little bit of a hit after nothing but accolades and celebrations on his part. He gets knocked down a peg or two by taking it was a fairly convincing that he lost that fight. You know, not the end of the world, but maybe he wants to get back on that horse and challenge Reeves. Very, very good possibility. And Revo hasn't fought in a long time.